Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for what we think is an important news conference to continue to update the community on the gun violence that's been taking place, not only in the city of Madison, but as we saw last night in the town of Madison. We have with us the town of Madison Police Chief Scott Gregory. We have several of our city leaders and alders with us. We also have Captain Jim Wheeler, who heads up our investigative services. He's in charge of all of our detectives here in the city of Madison. And, of course, we have Chief Koval with us as well, and he will begin our news conference, and we will explain the pictures that have been brought in, and you'll learn who these people are and why we're looking to find them. Chief?
Thank you, Joe. In some sense, owing to the alacrity of the moment and the increasing frequency of these tragic events, this is a glorified, as we call it in the industry, a bolo. Be on the lookout for, because we feel that owing out of public necessity of safety, that we continue to have as many eyeballs that we can looking and watching and being extensions of what we can't do. We can't be everywhere at all times. So to that extent, we're going to be talking about those individuals that we're all still very interested in, starting with the town of Madison's chief suspect in their incident from last night. The reason, though, however, that I asked to be flanked by so many of our elected officials is that theirs is not to be here only to the extent of supplementing sort of a law enforcement press conference, but theirs is to suggest and to show you in a very demonstrable way that all of these elected officials are seeing and dealing and collaborating with these issues with our constituents just as much, if not more so, from what they're hearing. They've seen tragic consequences unfold in their districts. The deputy mayor, of course, as Mayor Soglin's designee, is here, and I'm going to quickly introduce all of them, but suffice to say that the reason they stand here collaboratively with law enforcement today is to suggest that the real discussions, the long-term issues, isn't meant to deal with what's important now in terms of finding a few individuals that are creating a menace to our community safety. But theirs is here to truly dial down and drill down deeper in looking at how they can be a force to be reckoned with, in looking at the long-term implications of garnering greater community engagement, whether it be through forums or meetings or summits on these issues. And to that extent, I'm glad they could be here, and I'm going to quickly introduce, of course, Enos Ragland is the deputy mayor for Mayor Soglin. Alder Barbara McKinney from District 1. Thank you, Alder. Alder Maurice Cheeks, representing District 10. There we are. Alder Sherry Carter from 14. Thank you. And Alder Matt Fair from District 20. Okay. And now, to sort of show why this conference was collaborated in today, the sort of moment, the man of the moment right now will be Chief Scott Gregory. He's going to provide the impetus for what's occurred in the last 24 hours with the status of his investigation. And I guess what I'm here to suggest is that though we may be a variety of individual geographical entities with circumscribed territorial jurisdiction issues, that is not to suggest by any means that we aren't in daily collaboration and sharing and networking. And quite frankly, the street on one side of many parts of our city might be Madison and could be a bedroom community in the very next. So our greater, more superior role here is to look at how we can combine and conjoin our forces to try to promote public safety for the greater part of Madison, because as these issues affect one of us, they affect all of us. So with that, Chief, if you don't mind, I'll let you do the update on what you currently have on your suspect.
Great. Thanks, Chief.
You bet.
Thanks for being here, everyone. I saw a lot of you guys last night in the early morning hours, so I appreciate you being here tonight. Just to kind of recap what happened last night, our victim, who will be identified by the medical examiner, was at the Capitol Petro shopping with another person. The suspect came into the Capitol Petro. They saw each other, at which point the victim left Capitol Petro, exited very quickly. The suspect followed, and you can see in the video, surveillance video, the suspect pulled a firearm out and pointed at the victim. They ran around to the west side of the building, and at least one shot was fired on that side of the building. And then between the building and the car wash is where a number of rounds were fired, and where we eventually found the victim lying on the ground and provided medical assistance at that point. In the course of the shots that were fired there, a number of vehicles were hit with gunfire. So those vehicles were also taken as evidence as we were processing them as well. The victim was transported to the UW hospital and pronounced deceased last night. And our investigation has been proceeding since 8 o'clock last night. As you can see, we have a suspect in our homicide. Courtney D. Moore was identified through surveillance video and positively identified by law enforcement officers on the video. City of Madison has had contact with him and had contact with him at a location on Pheasant Ridge Trail last night. We served a search warrant looking for him last night at that residence in the 2500 block of Pheasant Ridge Trail. There was evidence that he was there directly after the shooting, but was no longer there when we served the search warrant. Mr. Moore should be considered armed and dangerous. If you see him, call 911. Be a good witness. Don't try to contact him. Don't try to be a hero. Call 911. He is armed. He is dangerous. He's a suspect in a homicide. And let our officers do their jobs to get him off the street. And we ask that please to give us a call and let us get him. As Chief Koval had mentioned, jurisdictions are imaginary lines. Our suspects, our victims, they don't know, are they in the city of Madison, are they in the town of Madison? We are working together. As a matter of fact, yesterday the city of Madison hosted a briefing, countywide briefing, on the shootings that have occurred throughout the Dane County and Madison area. We had 3 personnel attend that briefing, and then just hours later this homicide occurred. So this stuff is serious and we need it to stop. As was alluded, we are working very closely with the City of Madison detectives. Our detective personnel and the city detectives are working closely together, as these all seem to be related incidents of these two factions having issues with each other and dealing with gun violence. Chief?
Thank you. It wasn't all that long ago that when we were here, we were asking for the community support in helping us look for 2 material persons of interest in our O'Grady's homicide. Owing to that assistance, and we're very grateful for it, 2 out of those 3 people were subsequently apprehended, and we can continue to work our investigation to see their extent of culpability. Today we are adding, as you can see, we still had William Flowers at large, but the other 3 individuals are also bearing some sort of materiality and some nexus that bears our looking for them further. There is currently probable cause and or warrants for all of them at this time, and as the Chief Gregory admonished, we don't ever ask for people to take self-help measures. We ask that people be good professional witnesses in real time. If they're in a car, get us a plate, get us a direction of travel. If they're going into a home, make note of the address and call us, and stay out of sight and out of harm's way. We'll take it from there. Those folks, again, are not necessarily going to be charged with the homicide which occurred at O'Grady's, but they have material information, and oh, by the way, they're wanted and they're dangerous. With respect to, as you may have known, that we have had a spate of gun shootings all throughout the city. There is no one community per se that's being favored, to use that term awkwardly. I would suggest that this is a sign of the times. It's a very mobile phenomena. A lot of these folks are in cars and highly mobile. In that sense, we don't think that Madison is at great risks per se, because at this juncture the risks are with the errant rounds of fire, because they are targeting one another. And our, of course, collective concern is always that those rounds, if left unfettered or if ricocheted, could certainly hurt unsuspecting and innocent individuals. At the second foursome then. Those are persons of interest in a rash of, we have probably over 20 guns fired calls over the course of about a month or a month and a half, at 35 since the beginning of the year. These folks are all suspected as having some complicity to some degree or extent, and some or all of a lot of these other shootings. And so since we have the forum and we have your attention, we want to continue to enlist the support of our community in being an extra set of eyes, an extra set of ears for us, and trying to locate and effect their detention so that we can examine the extent to which they are culpable for these crimes as well. So, as we began, I just want to say again that what you're seeing here in terms of the law enforcement response can only be at best the tip of this initiative. If not for the concerted and coordinated effort of our community leaders, either titled, monikered, or de facto leaders from within our midst, those who other people will follow, we need to enlist their corporate support and collaboration in helping us not only to identify what's important in the short-term analysis in terms of eradicating gun violence, but also how we can build a community where we can mitigate those proclivities. All right? Okay. If it hasn't already been suggested or stated, I've seen some website trafficking on it, so I will deal with it here and now. We also believe that, of course, that the suspect in the town of Madison shooting is related to our victim in the O'Grady's pub. Okay? They are brothers. So because of the names, I know that that was going to come up by way of speculation, so in an effort to be transparent, we just want to get that out there right here and now, which again shows that, I think, sort of the connectiveness of how these shootings have been occurring over the last couple of weeks and why there's seemingly two factions that cannot resolve their differences short of using a gun.
Any questions for either the chiefs or any of the alders or others? Mr. Raven from the mayor's office.
Could you repeat the relationship between the two Moors?
The shooter, for whom the town of Madison has probable cause to believe was responsible for the homicide occurring in their jurisdiction last night, is a brother to the victim in the O'Grady's pub homicide. Okay?
Chief, you mentioned these two factions. Do these two factions have identifying names? Are you guys labeling them something, or are they self-labeled?
No, I think, again, there's always a proclivity to try to pigeonhole people as if this were some sort of Jets versus Sharks, now I'm really dating myself, in sort of West Side Story gang stuff. This isn't about turf. This isn't about profit. This isn't about one thing or another. These are folks that are, they may have been or may be currently in a gang. It may be a part of their background. But it's not necessarily to suggest that gangs or gang warfare are what's precipitating this. It could be something, quite frankly, a lot more simplistic or benign, but for whatever reason or not, enough people are upset that their friends, their acquaintances, their loved ones are now getting singled out and targeted, and so now we seem to be on this endless cycle of retaliatory, revenge-seeking motives. And that's, I think, what...
Connection between the Petro victim, right, and the BP victim. Can you just tie the sort of family tree together for everybody?
Is it two families or is it two
Because
factions?
there's cousins, right?
I think that we'd, well, before we get into everybody's family tree, I think it would be easier to loosely call this two different groups of friends, acquaintances, and some are related by blood or by other mechanism, by law, by marriage. So I think, you know, people say, are these guys gang members? Well, some people may have put gang as part of who they were or who they are now, but to suggest that gang involvement is the catalyst or the impetus for this ongoing problem, I think is a reach based on what our fact-finding has produced thus far.
Is there a belief that this suspect was trying to exact revenge over his brother's homicide?
Well, again, I can't do interpretive dance on what his motives are or make attribution, but because they are brothers, that is certainly one of the operational theories that we can't discount.
Was the Petro victim cousins with, I think I kind of heard that this morning, cousins with the BP?
I don't know your affiliation as far as that one, Chief. Do you No,
I
clarify.
don't know.
You, Captain, I'm not sure about that family tree.
Well, you're right, Chief. We're looking at this as more of associations and other ties. We're not really looking at this like this belongs to this family or this gang or another family, but through our contacts, previous contacts, through what we know, we are just looking at this as associations between different groups of people.
So do you feel that the victim from last night shot Martez Moore?
We can't say that right now. We're still investigating this. We're still trying to put all this together to make sense of it.
It's also, I think, important just to separate out that the people that we're looking at as persons of interest in a number of shootings, those people are not connected to the homicide investigation. So these are two separate investigations, and in fact, and Chief Koval could speak to this, or Captain Wheeler, we've had different teams of detectives working, some on the shootings that are not related to the homicides, and some a team working on the homicides. So I don't know if you can explain that.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, when this first started with O'Grady's, we got a lot of names of different people. We looked at it as if it was connected at first, but it was quickly determined that these were separate incidents between the group of shootings and the homicides.
Do you have any sense, gentlemen and ladies, as to whether the suspects had knowledge that their victims were going to be at a certain time at these public places, at these gas stations, and they were sabotaged, if you will? They were found, they were trapped there.
That's too early to tell right now and to have a definitive answer. It's still in the early stages of this investigation, and we're still pulling together facts.
Let me just add. To your point, if there's targeting or an ambush quality like to this, we can't dismiss that. I think that's a very relevant consideration, and what we will do through our forensics, through the cameras, digitalized, getting search warrants for other matters, and a lot of things that we can get search warrants for, we can make a better reflection of whether, in fact, that supposition, that of literally being stalked and ambushed, is a relevant consideration on this. We haven't outruled that possibility. The other thing is, folks, is that, we've talked, and someone, just a constituent today, wrote to us and said, tell me more about the code. Why aren't people coming forward? And let's just be clear. Some view this sort of code of silence as sort of an honor among people who engage in this, if they think that's an honorable gesture. Others are, quite frankly, petrified for fear of anything coming back to them and associated. I've met with, and will continue to meet with, the victims' families who are left in the aftermath of these tragedies, and they are still scared. They're scared about conducting their vigil. I know there's a vigil tonight. They're scared about the funeral preparations and what a visitation and subsequent internment will do. And they've asked for extra police help, and we're providing that coordination and that assistance to them. So it's not owing exclusively to this code of silence sort of among thieves, if you will. And the other component that obviously can't be minimized is that to some extent there might be a very viable reason. That's the reason some of our local community hasn't come forth and fully identified who these culprits are is because there may be an element of imported talent, if you will. So we can't rule out any of these variables until we get more deeper into subsequent peeling back the various layers of the onion to see what's true and what's not. So,
Chief, I remember just one quick question.
Chief Gregory, do you want to touch on the other questions? We were talking about whether people were set up and targeted, or if there was I don't know if you, since that's their investigation, we can't really comment.
Yep, that is something that we are investigating to make that determination if the victim was set up. We haven't ruled it out. We haven't determined that was a fact. So it is an area that we're looking at. I also want to mention that we had a lot of cooperation last night with witnesses, and I was happy to see that. A lot of the witnesses stuck around for well over an hour to talk to detectives. And so we are seeing a little bit more cooperation from the community as they witness these crimes, and hopefully that will help get these people like Mr. Moore in custody.
Have community officers been aware of these actions just generally, and is there opportunity, or are they reaching out to the more rational elements to say, let's have a ceasefire?
That would suggest that we have that sort of knowledge of the level of sophisticated communications that are taking place internally. Clearly, there's sort of a keeping score element, so we can't dismiss that idea. But the extent of which, how elaborate that communication is, or the extent or the width of that network, that remains something to be found out down the road, I think. So.
Chief, can I just ask, I seem to remember 7 or 8 years ago when your gang officers would come out and talk about gang-related crimes, that people at the time were saying, how can there be gangs? There's not really any shootings. And now we come back today, we're starting to see a lot more shootings. And this increase in violence, would you tie that to the increase in heroin that we're seeing? Do you think that there's an element to now start controlling turfs where there wasn't before?
I don't know if it's so much turfs in the conventional sense of the era you and I were growing up with. As I said, it's a mobile world, and this is a generation that embraces technology and that mobility. It can be motivated by any one of the most classic things like jealousy over someone or something. It can be owing to being high or intoxicated when you're making rash, poor decision making. So the whys, the wherefores, what's the underlying motivation? All we know is that something some time ago, a couple weeks ago, started this snowball rolling downhill. And now, owing to sort of this precipitous momentum that it's gained, now it's just sort of like this taking stock and taking care of one another, and we're going to show you who gets the last sort of word mindset. So,
but if there's retaliatory murders happening, that would be new for Madison, right?
Oh, I don't think we've seen anything the likes of this in terms of this sort of recurring frequency for the better part of our professional careers. And Joel used to be one of y'all until he converted. So at that point, I can say that we haven't seen anything like this. I can recall the, not to pick on poor Bernie, but I can remember the triple homicide in Verona, but that was in one fell swoop. This is sustained over a number of weeks, and there is that symmetry that seems to be linking them all.
I think Captain Miller could tell you we do see retaliation, but to have this type of retaliation with this type of deadly force in this short time period, I think is very new for Madison.
But to attribution about motivation, I think that's, again, what these elected officials are trying to better gauge on. Obviously, I think that when you have people who are desperate owing to what they can or can't do with job skill sets, or they don't have sufficient education, or they don't have adequate housing, they don't have a way to support themselves or their families, or they don't have adequate mentoring, I think in the long analysis, that's where we're going to get the more traction. And I do know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I know the mayor is going to be calling upon a call to sort of action, community action, this Saturday with a press conference, if I'm not mistaken. So stay tuned for that, because I think we are sort of literally only putting on, in a metaphorical sense, Band-Aids on a significant problem that's very overt. People are dead. At the end of the day, if we hope to do the major surgery that's going to be required, or to engage in preventive holistic medicine to avoid these tragedies, that's where these people are going to have to be center stage in looking at what are the ongoing needs and the necessities of a community that's going through these pains.
Just quickly to your point on the possibility of imported talent. So do we believe all these men to be local to Madison area?
Well, a number of these have local affiliations, which is why we can identify them. It's why they have been named by others or through our criminal intelligence sources. So these are more or less known commodities, although, again, I think you'll see that a lot of the folks that we're dealing with are imports in terms of Chicago or Milwaukee or things like that. But for right here, right now, this would be the local flavor of the people that we're looking into, but that's not to suggest or preclude by any means the fact that we have intelligence to suggest that there could be some other outside interlopers involved. And we'll just leave it at that because it's too preliminary.
What's the concern with a lot of these shootings happening in public places during daylight?
Well, the brazenness of it all, the boldness, the sort of reckless disregard for any innocent human life is what's sort of so stark and which keeps us all reeling, because we all get gas. We all go for bread and milk. We all do those natural things in the normal course of our daily lives. That is a normal situation. And when normality is thrown on its head and turned sideways, as it has been, in these very public gathering spaces that we all are comfortable and familiar with, that really resonates and gives everybody that second pause. So that's why there's a sense of urgency, and that's why we're glad you could come.
Have you talked to the Moore family about having a victim and a suspect?
At this juncture, I'm sure that the investigative services personnel will be our emissaries, if you will, to try to talk about the delicacies of those relationships and what that means in an investigation and what that means to the family. I think it only appropriate is that detectives that we have assigned to these are doing far more than investigating crimes. They are trying to deal with people who are coping with tragic loss, unexpected loss, and they're also coordinating with Dane County's Victim Witness Unit to try to provide some coping and relief services to these folks just to get by 1 hour, if not 1 day at a time, until their loved ones are buried. All right?
If I could just build on that for 1 second. The one concern I have is Mr. Moore is a 28-year-old man. He killed somebody. We think he killed somebody. In that aspect, we have a 28-year-old man here who may have just ruined his life. I don't understand why lives aren't mattering anymore to these people who are shooting and getting shot at. That just makes no sense to me, how the value of a human life seems to have diminished. And that's something I'm looking for answers on why that is. And if anybody has that, let us know, because it's a 28-year-old man who looks like a good man. And it's just baffling to a lot of us. Joe.
I'm not on script to speak, but I am going to speak because most of your questions have been around the incident, and we're standing here as public officials to support the chief in saying enough violence. But you need to hear from the elected officials. The constituents are looking to hear from the elected officials. And it just does not do us service to leave this press conference without you hearing the voice of those who are elected to serve the people. And we are saying collectively, violence must stop. And I'm going to ask Alder Cheeks to step forward because he's the senior representative of this collaborative that you see here.
The chief mentioned that this man is 28 years old. I was elected to the city council when I was 28 years old. All of these young men look like me, more like me than any of the press in this room. And it's really tragic to me. It's heartbreaking to think about the fact that the best pictures that we have of them all come from interaction that they've had in the past with law enforcement. We know that cycle is really, really hard to get out of. It's near impossible to get out of. And so when you see young men losing hope, it's because they've lost the sense of opportunity. It's because of reasons that are too complicated to get into here, but this morning as I walked through Allied Drive with my neighbors, with my constituents, that was the cry of the mothers, not necessarily these young men's mothers, but the mothers in the neighborhood who are raising young men, single mothers raising young men, trying to create opportunity for them in a world where it's difficult for these men to see opportunity. My colleagues and I stand here today to reassure the public that this incident, as Alder McKinney described, this incident is one that the police are beginning to form an understanding of. It's one that is under investigation, and we don't have any reason to believe that it is random, right? And so I hope that the public can take some solace in that fact. But I also hope that the public see this trend, this picture that we have painted here, and find themselves wholly discontent with this reality, that as we grow as a city, as we increase in population and increase rapidly in diversity, I hope that the public, that our residents will come together and recognize the dire importance of young men being able to see a life for themselves here, being able to live in a city where they feel that they can thrive, that there's opportunities for mentorship, for jobs, for success. And as we look at these persons of interest and suspect, the pictures that we have for them represent a window, a small window into a moment in time where obviously their lens of opportunity was shrinking. But it doesn't need to be that way. We can't accept that as normal. And my colleagues and I are determined to work together to provide a voice for those families directly or indirectly affected by these type of incidents, by these moments of inopportunity, of lack of hope. We're determined to create a platform for which these young men can find new opportunities for restored hope and restored justice, so that these families who currently are hurting, whether they're related to the victims or the suspects, they're hurting because their families are falling apart. And we know for a fact, it's a very unfortunate fact, that in many cases these families were falling apart long before these incidents. That's not acceptable. That's not acceptable in our community. It's not acceptable for anyone. This city has a long history of being a city where everyone, we believe everyone has an opportunity for success. The legacy that we leave for the next generation needs to be that everyone has an opportunity for success in this city. That's what we're working on as a city council. Thank you.
And anyone's welcome to speak. So.
Let me speak for a moment. I just want to talk to the young men out there. Don't let your anger direct your future.
Yeah.
Don't let one incident lead you down another road to a future that puts you in prison. Don't leave your children without a father. Don't leave your mother or father without a child. Take the time to think before you react. Thank you.
All those comments were wonderful. I don't really much more to add except to just say that when I look at those young men, as Alder Cheeks had said, I think of them as young kids. And being a teacher myself, I've really been focused on, with Alder Cheeks and others, on what can we do to help young kids lead a different path away from violence. And so we've been working on that for about the last year. And we, because look at those guys and you think, well, what paths could they have taken, or what interventions could not only their families, but also their communities and their city and the resources that we have in the city have done to put them on the right path. And so we will be coming out very shortly with recommendations on, particularly to youth violence prevention, gun violence and other violence, and recommending things to the City Council in the next budget season, as well as things that we can implement hopefully fairly soon. So look forward to that. You'll be hearing from us very soon on that.
I'll defer to him.
Anyone have any additional questions? Yes, and direct them to whoever.
I'm sorry. What was her name?
Alder Sherry Carter.
Okay, thank you.
I have all the names of the alders too, if you need.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Otherwise, thank you very much. I guess I will say that I grew up in Madison, and as Alder Cheeks said, I too have the hope that we can accomplish things in this city where other cities may have fallen short. And there are a lot of good people out there on our Common Council. There are a lot of good police officers, a lot of good people working in the communities. And I think these young people all have hope, and when they're young. And so if we can continue them on that path of hope, that's what I think everyone in this city is hoping for. But for right now, we're going to have to deal with the reality of what's happened in the last couple of weeks. So thank you so much.
Thank you.